I've told this story maybe a dozen times since it happened, and every time I get to the part where she looked up at me, those four pale eyes wide open, the bioluminescent streaks on her cheekbones flickering between violet and gold, people always stop me. They ask, "Were you scared?" And I never know what to say because scared doesn't really cover it. There's a specific kind of feeling you get when you realize the moment you're living in is the kind that splits your life into before and after. It's not fear exactly. It's more like your body goes very still and your brain starts taking photographs of everything. The wet smell of the docking platform, the distant thrum of the transit rails overhead, the way her fingers were wrapped around her own knees, like she was trying to hold herself together. That's what I was doing, taking mental photographs, because some part of me already understood that I was never going to forget this night. My name is Marcus Haley, and on the evening of May 14th, by old Earth calendar, I was supposed to be having the worst Tuesday of my life. I'd missed my transit pass renewal by 6 days. 6. That's all it took for the Kepler Station Transit Authority to red flag my travel credentials and lock me out of the express lane at Dock 7. Which meant I had to walk across the lower connector, 3 kilometers of exposed grating above the shipping bays, in the middle of a pressure front that the station's weather system had decided to model as a rainstorm. I say model because Kepler Station doesn't have real weather. It's a hub station, one of the big ones. 87 kilometers long, rotating to simulate gravity, with a full pressurized atmosphere managed by about 400 computers and a crew of engineers who apparently thought that Earth colonists would be more psychologically stable if they could experience something resembling rain twice a week on a scheduled cycle. The rain on Kepler is fine, warm, slightly chlorinated. It smells faintly of copper and recycled air. I hated it that night. I had my hood up, my transit bag slung over my shoulder, and I was walking fast because I had a shift at the cargo sorting facility in 40 minutes, and my supervisor, a Brellian named Akvaz, had already docked my pay twice this rotation for being late. The lower connector was mostly empty. Most people with any sense were either in the express tunnels or waiting the rain out in one of the covered transit pods. But not me, because I'd missed my pass renewal by 6 days. The grating under my boots made that hollow clang with every step. Below me, through the mesh, I could see the tops of the freight containers in Bay 9, stacked 30 meters high, lit orange and white by the loading drones that worked the night shifts. There was a constant low vibration from the rail systems, and the rain made a hissing sound when it hit the metal. I had my head down, and I almost walked past her. Almost. She was in the maintenance alcove just before the midpoint of the connector. A recessed section, maybe 2 meters deep, where the station engineers had installed secondary pressure valves and some kind of coolant manifold. It was dry in there, the overhang kept the rain off, and she'd tucked herself against the far wall with her arms wrapped around her knees. The first thing I saw were the lights. Not lights exactly, more like the absence of darkness. A faint pulse of violet starting somewhere near her collarbone and traveling up to her jaw and across her cheekbones, then fading. Then gold. Then back to violet, slow, rhythmic, the kind of thing your eye catches at the edge of your vision and then double checks. I stopped. I stood at the entrance to the alcove for a second, rain still hitting my back, and I looked at her. She was small, smaller than I'd expected, though I don't know why I expected anything. Her limbs were long and slightly wrong, the proportions just a degree or two off from human standard. Her skin was dark, the kind of deep gray-blue that looks almost black in low light, and the bioluminescent markings that were doing all that pulsing ran from the base of her throat all the way up both sides of her neck, across her cheeks, and disappeared somewhere under the hood of a garment that looked like it had been through something serious. Torn at the shoulder. Something that might have been blood, or might have been something else, drying in a dark patch just above her hip. She had 4 eyes. 2 at the normal human position, 2 smaller ones about 2 centimeters above them, shifted slightly outward. All 4 were open and looking at me. She had been crying. I know what crying looks like across a lot of species. I've worked cargo and transit on Kepler for 3 years, and you see everything eventually. Crying is pretty universal, the drawn features, the tension around the eyes, the specific kind of exhaustion that comes after. She had all of it. And she was looking at me with an expression I recognized instantly. She was waiting to see if I was going to hurt her. I lowered my transit bag slowly. I took one step back so I wasn't blocking the alcove exit. I held my hands away from my body, open, palms up. It's the most ancient signal there is, and it turns out it translates across a lot more than just Earth cultures. "Hey," I said, my voice came out quieter than I meant it to. "You okay?" She didn't answer. The violet pulse flickered faster for a second, then slowed. "I'm not going to bother you," I said. You're hurt, I can see that, and it's raining." Still nothing, but she hadn't looked away and she hadn't tried to move. "I have a basic medkit in my bag," I said. "It's probably not calibrated for your biology, but I have pressure bandages, universal adhesion. They work on most surfaces." Very slowly, still watching me, she uncurled one arm from around her knees and held it out. The inside of her forearm had a long laceration, clean, straight, the kind you get from a sharp edge rather than a blunt one. It wasn't deep enough to be dangerous, I didn't think, but it was still seeping. I sat down on the grating at the entrance to the alcove, rain on my back, and opened my bag. I've thought a lot about what happened in the next 20 minutes, and why I handled it the way I did. Part of it was simple. She was hurt and I had something that might help. That's not complicated. You don't need a reason for that. But part of it was something else. Something about the way she was positioned against that wall. The way she'd pulled herself into the smallest possible space. The way she kept glancing past me toward the connector, like she was watching for something coming from the direction I'd come from. Someone, I realized. She was watching for someone. I kept my movements slow and obvious while I got the pressure bandage out. I held it up so she could see it before I approached. She watched every move I made, all four eyes tracking, but she didn't flinch when I got close. I pressed the bandage against the laceration and applied pressure, and she made a sound low, almost subsonic, something I felt more than heard, and the bioluminescent markings flared to a brief, bright gold before settling back to that slow violet. "That should hold it," I said. She looked down at the bandage, then up at me. Then she said something. Her voice was strange, layered, like there were two frequencies running simultaneously, and the language was nothing I recognized. Not Brellian, not the trade dialect, not anything in the 16 or so phrases I'd picked up from working the docks. But I had a translation module on my comm unit, basic, consumer grade, terrible at idiom, so I pulled it out and held it up. She looked at the device, then she repeated what she'd said. The translator gave me, "Not safe, they will, searching, you should." The words were fragmentary, half of it didn't parse, but I got the shape of it. "Someone's looking for you," I said. The translator hummed for a second, and gave her something approximating what I'd said. She responded immediately, faster and more urgently, and the translator gave me a longer fragment. "3, they do not, if they find me here, the compact. You are human, you are." "I'm going to need you to slow down a little," I said. "My translator is very bad." She stopped, she seemed to take stock of this. Then very carefully she started again, slower, using simpler constructions. The translator gave me, piece by piece. 3 ships looking for me. If they find me in this place, they will, untranslatable, claiming ownership of / asserting jurisdiction over everyone nearby. You should go. I sat back on my heels. 3 ships are looking for you, I said. She gave a single nod, human enough. Maybe she'd spent time around humans, or maybe that particular gesture was just convergent evolution. And they're going to do something bad to anyone who's near you when they find you. Another nod, faster this time. I looked out at the empty connector. The rain was still coming down. Somewhere in the distance, a transit pod's horn sounded low and resonant, the kind of sound that normally means the end of a shift. I thought about my supervisor Akvaz, and my docked pay, and my missed transit renewal, and the fact that this was supposed to be the worst Tuesday of my life. "Okay," I said. "Come with me." Part 2, what she was. Her name, or the closest approximation my translator could manage, was something that came out as Severin Dale, though she indicated with a slight motion of her upper pair of eyes that I was getting the pronunciation slightly wrong. I called her Save, and after the second time she made a small sound that the translator identified as amusement acknowledgement. I decided that worked. She could walk, which was fortunate, because the lower connector had another 1.5 kilometers before it connected to the residential ring, and I wasn't going to be able to carry her without drawing significantly more attention than I wanted. She moved carefully, favoring her right side. The injury above her hip was worse than the arm. She hadn't let me look at it properly, but the way she held herself told me it was something muscular rather than structural. She could put weight on it. She just didn't want to. I kept us moving and I kept talking, low and quiet, because people who are visibly distressed and moving in public draw fewer looks when someone is talking to them. It's a strange human observation, but a true one. A person walking alone and clearly frightened looks like a problem. A person walking with someone else and having a conversation looks like they're just going somewhere. "Tell me about the 3 ships, I said, slowly. She talked, the translator struggled. I pieced it together. The first ship, she used a word the translator gave as authority enforcement/adjudicating body vessel, belonged to something called the Veil Compact, which I gathered was a political entity of some size. A hegemony or a confederation. The translator wasn't clear on the structure. What it was clear on was that the Veil Compact had a claim on save that was, in her words, not of choice imposed by circumstances of birth. The second ship was from something called the Driki Sovereignty. Rivals of the Compact, I gathered, though the nature of the rivalry wasn't entirely clear from the fragmentary translation. What was clear was that the Driki Sovereignty also had a claim on her, and it was a different kind of claim, and the 2 claims were mutually exclusive in a way that was causing significant problems. The third ship was the one she seemed most afraid of. She didn't have a good word for them, or rather, the translator couldn't give me a good word. What it gave me was Empire/Dominion/consuming force, something without a proper name in trade dialect, or at least not one she was using, something old, something that had been looking for her, she said, for longer than the other 2. "Why are they looking for you?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. Then the translator gave me, one careful phrase at a time. "I am the last living, untranslatable, heir/bloodline holder/convergence point of a line that ended. What I carry in my genetic sequence is untranslatable, key/unlocking element/opening mechanism to something that all 3 of them want." I processed this as we walked. "You're carrying something in your DNA," I said. "Effectively, yes. And all 3 of these empires want it. They want me, the sequence, what it opens." "What does it open?" She looked at me. The bioluminescent markings pulsed a complicated rhythm, fast, then slow, then fast again. The translator, unprompted, gave me a single word from whatever that meant. "Everything." I lived in residential Block 14C, which is about as unglamorous as it sounds. Kepler Station's residential rings were designed in the early expansion period, when the station's architects were still convinced that humans would be perfectly happy living in efficient capsule arrangements as long as they had access to a common room and a public food printer. The efficient capsule arrangements were the size of a generous walk-in closet. The common rooms smelled of synthetic coffee and other people's cooking, and the food printers had been broken since 2287. My unit had, however, one significant advantage. It was on the interior curve of the ring, which meant it had no external viewports, and the only way to scan it from outside was to go through the station's internal sensor grid. I didn't know at that point how important that was going to be. I got Save inside without anyone seeing her, which was partly luck, and partly the fact that 14C was a low-traffic block favored by cargo workers and transit staff, people who worked odd hours and minded their own business as a matter of professional habit. She stood in the middle of my unit and looked around. I watched her take it in, the low ceiling, the equipment stacked against one wall, the fold-out work surface, the sleep platform on the opposite side. The translator module she'd been using was a dedicated unit I carried for dock work. I pulled up the interface and spent a few minutes improving the calibration settings, feeding it a baseline vocabulary that I'd built up over 3 years of working alongside a dozen different species. It didn't get perfect, but it got better. "Sit down," I told her. "Let me look at that side." She sat gingerly, precisely, the way someone sits when they're trying not to show how much it hurts, and I got my medkit out properly. The injury above her hip was a burn. Not a contact burn, a directed energy burn, the kind you get from a weapon discharge. It was superficial by whatever standards applied to her biology, but I could see the tissue damage through the tear in her garment, and it looked painful. "Someone shot you," I said. "Yes." Before you got to the connector. Yes. In the transition dock, I was trying to reach a communications relay. The compact's enforcement agents, they were faster than I expected. How did you get away? The translator gave me after a moment. I am faster than they expected. I almost smiled. I cleaned the burn as best I could with the antiseptic gel from my kit. She made that subsonic sound again, the one I felt in my chest, and the markings went a very bright, brief orange, and then applied a broad thermal seal bandage that was designed for human skin, but apparently provided at least some useful compression. While I worked, I asked her the question I'd been holding. The 3 ships that are looking for you, I said. How long do you think before they narrow down where you are? She thought about it. The compact agents know I was in the transition dock. They will have the entry sensor logs. They know I was injured and moving on foot. They will be working through the station sectors systematically. The Driki, I am less certain. They may have different methods. The third, they do not search like the others. They sense. I stopped what I was doing. They sense, I repeated. There are beings among them who can detect the specific resonance signature of a bloodline like mine. At distance, through material obstacles. I sat back. Okay, I said, so we have a time problem. Yes. How much time? She looked at me with all 4 of her eyes. The markings settled into a slow, steady violet pulse. If we are fortunate, hours. If we are not. She didn't finish the sentence. I didn't need her to. Part 3, what humans do. I am not a soldier. I want to be clear about that. I'm a cargo sorter. Before Kepler, I worked freight logistics on a bulk hauler called the Meridian Advance for 4 years. Before that, I spent 2 years planetside doing agricultural equipment maintenance on Callaway's World, which is a dust-covered rock that almost no one has ever heard of and almost no one ever needs to. I have a basic transit worker's license, a cargo handling certification, a first aid qualification that I'd needed to renew twice, and a working knowledge of 16 species that comes from 3 years of dock work rather than any formal education. What I did have, what I'd always had, my grandmother used to say it was my one useful quality, was the ability to think in systems. Give me a problem with enough moving pieces and I stop feeling scared. Something happens in my brain. It's not bravery. It's more like my anxiety has nowhere to land because it's too busy following the logic chains. 3 ships, 3 different actors, 1 target. A station with internal sensor grids, external docking protocols, and about 80,000 inhabitants who were currently going about their lives with no idea what was parked in the outer bays. I pulled up my station schematic on my work terminal, the same one I used to track cargo manifests, and started mapping. The compact agents, I said, they're the ones who shot you. They're enforcement. Yes, they have jurisdictional authority within compact space. This station exists in a disputed corridor. They believe their jurisdiction extends here. Do they have station authorization? I do not know. What kind of numbers are we talking about? The enforcement squad, I counted 6 before I ran. There may be more on the ship. I nodded, pulling up the transit records. Kepler Station's public arrival log was accessible from any terminal. It was a matter of port transparency. I scanned the last 48 hours. There it was, compact verification vessel Keldort, registered as a diplomatic transport with an override code that had cleared the outer bays in priority sequence. 8 hours ago. Second entry 30 hours ago, DSV Narath Keen, Driki Registry, listed as a commercial survey vessel. I didn't believe that for a second. The third, nothing, no listing, which meant either they were very good at hiding their approach or they hadn't docked at all. That last part bothered me more than anything else. The third group, I said. You said they sense. Does that mean they can find you from outside the station? Save was quiet for a longer time than I liked. If they are close enough, within a few thousand kilometers, at that range, a bloodline like mine produces a resonance that their sensitives can detect. The station's hull provides some shielding, not complete shielding. So staying here in the station isn't a permanent solution. No, we need to get you off the station. That was my original intention. There is a ship, a vessel I arranged passage on before I arrived. It is registered under a neutral identity, berthed at Dock 19. I was trying to reach it when the compact agents intercepted me. Dock 19. I looked at the schematic. That's in the outer commercial ring. To get there from here, you'd have to go through either the central hub or the lower connector, and both of those run through the sectors where the compact agents are probably searching right now. Yes, that was the problem. I looked at the schematic for a long time. Then I thought about something my shift supervisor Akvaz had complained about for the past 6 weeks. The ongoing maintenance work on the secondary cargo transfer system, which had closed 3 of the usual routes between the inner residential ring and the outer commercial docks, and forced all the cargo traffic to reroute through the maintenance service corridors. The maintenance service corridors that the station sensor grid treated as engineering infrastructure rather than transit pathways, and therefore didn't monitor at traffic density levels. How good is your translator on technical vocabulary? I asked Save. Adequate, the translator said. Why? Because I'm going to need you to understand some very specific instructions, and I'm going to need you to follow them exactly. The bioluminescent markings pulsed gold for a moment, something I was beginning to associate with either interest or anticipation. Tell me. I have to describe the next 2 hours carefully, because the sequence of events matters and I don't want to get it wrong. I contacted 3 people. First, Priya Mehta, who worked the night shift in the station's engineering division and owed me a significant favor from an incident involving a misrouted cargo container that I'd never reported to the authority logs. Priya had access to the maintenance corridor scheduling system. Second, a Brellian dockworker named Velgon who worked Dock 16 through 20, and who, like most Brellians, had a profoundly casual attitude toward the concept of station authority as applied to minor transit irregularities. Velgon could, for the right consideration, make sure that a berth at Dock 19 stayed clear, and that the right access code ended up in the right hands. Third, a man named Dorodio Sauceda who worked cargo security and who had, over 3 years of shared lunches in the common room, become something close to a friend. Dorodio didn't know details. I called him and said, "There's a situation developing near Dock 7 and the transition areas. Pay extra attention to anything unusual." He asked me 2 questions. I answered one of them, and he didn't ask a third. Then I spent 45 minutes in a conversation with Save that required 3 complete calibration resets of the translator and a great deal of patience on both sides, going through the route I'd mapped. Every corridor, every junction, every timing window. She listened carefully. She asked precise questions. The translator handled them adequately. When we'd been through it twice, she looked at me in a way that I found difficult to interpret. "Why are you doing this?" the translator gave me. I thought about it for longer than I probably needed to. "Because you were sitting in the rain," I said finally, "and you were scared, and I had something in my bag that could help." She made a sound that the translator identified, after a pause, as acknowledging wait/receiving fully. Then she stood up. "I am ready," she said. Part 4, the corridors. We left my unit at the 2200 bell. Kepler Station's internal time cycle was Earth Standard, and 2200 put us at the low traffic point between the end of the evening shift and the beginning of the night maintenance windows. The maintenance corridors were not nice. I knew this from the one time I'd had to use them to chase a misdirected container 3 years ago. They were narrow, about 1.5 meters wide, with exposed conduit running along both walls and the kind of lighting that someone had installed thinking it was adequate and had been wrong about. The floor was solid composite rather than grating, which meant sound traveled differently. Footsteps went from a clang to a dull thud, which was an improvement. They smelled of lubricant and ozone, and the specific metallic warmth of active power systems. Save moved well in them. Better than I did, honestly. She was narrower, and she moved with a careful, deliberate economy that suggested she was accustomed to tight spaces or to situations requiring silence or both. Her bioluminescent markings had dimmed to almost nothing, which I suspected was voluntary. The violet pulse was barely visible at close range. Priya had cleared our path through the scheduling system. The 2 junction points that would have shown our presence on engineering monitoring were marked as sensor calibration areas until 2330, which gave us a window. We moved. The first problem came at Junction 7. Junction 7 was a wider intersection where 2 maintenance corridors crossed, and it should have been empty, I had Priya's word that it was empty. But as we approached, me about 2 meters ahead of Save, the agreed sequence, I heard voices. I stopped. 2 of them coming from the right-hand corridor. The language was not trade dialect and not any human language I knew. It had a clipped, precise quality, consonant-heavy, fast, with a rhythm that felt like it had been built for efficiency rather than expression. I turned back to Save. In the dim light, I could see her markings had gone completely dark, every single one of them, and she'd gone very still. She mouthed something. The translator wasn't running. I'd kept it offline to prevent any signal output, but I didn't need it. Compact agents. I pressed myself against the conduit-lined wall and thought very fast. Junction 7 opened into 4 corridors. We'd come from the south. We needed to go west toward the outer ring. The agents were coming from the east. The north corridor, I pulled up my mental map. The north corridor led to the secondary coolant systems, a dead end. But there was a service access in the ceiling of Junction 7, a maintenance hatch that the engineering crews used to access the upper infrastructure layer. I'd noticed it on the schematic because it was marked as a standard access point. I looked up. It was there, a dark square in the ceiling, about 3 meters up, with a service ladder bolted to the wall. I looked at Save and pointed up, then made a climbing motion. She looked at the hatch, then at me, then at her injured side. She gave a very small, very decisive nod. I went first. The ladder was metal rungs bolted to composite, and they held. I pushed the hatch open. It moved on pressurized hinges, silent, and pulled myself through, then reached back down. Save climbed. I could tell it cost her something, the way she held her right side rigid, the way her markings flickered once to orange and then went dark again. But she made it. I pulled her through the hatch and lowered it back into place on a 3 count, slow and controlled. We lay in the upper infrastructure layer and listened. Below us, the voices passed through Junction 7. I counted footsteps, 4, maybe 5, heavy-booted. They spoke briefly, paused at the junction, then moved on, heading south, toward the residential ring. Toward where we'd started. Save's hand was on the floor of the infrastructure layer next to mine, and I could feel faintly through the composite the same subsonic vibration she'd been making since I'd found her. Lower now, almost a hum. We stayed there for 4 minutes by my internal count. Then I checked the hatch, checked the corridor below through the narrow gap, and we climbed back down. The second problem came 20 minutes later and was harder. We were 200 meters from the corridor that accessed the Dock 19 sector when Save stopped walking. I looked back. She was standing completely still, all 4 eyes fixed on something ahead of us. "What?" I whispered. Her translator was back online now. We'd reached a distance where I'd decided the risk of the signal was lower than the risk of miscommunication. "There is someone in the corridor ahead," she said. "Not compact, not dreaky." I felt something cold move through me. The third group. One of their sensitives. They are not moving. They are listening for resonance. Can they hear us from here? Not yet. We are at the edge of their detection range. If I move forward closer, yes, they will find me. How far ahead are they? 80 meters, perhaps 90. I looked around the corridor, ahead behind the walls to either side, the conduit, the power trunk lines running at floor level. Power trunk lines. I crouched down. The trunk lines on Kepler Station's maintenance corridors carried high-amperage current between the generating systems and the residential commercial rings. They were insulated, obviously, but the insulation created a consistent M field around each line, and that field. I'd read about this once. In a cargo manifest of all places, a shipment of specialized sensor equipment with handling instructions that mentioned interference from high-amperage infrastructure. Certain kinds of resonance detection could be disrupted by strong, coherent electromagnetic fields. I didn't know if that applied to whatever these sensitives were doing. But I didn't have a better idea. "I need you to walk as close to the left wall as you can," I said, "as close as physically possible. Keep yourself in contact with the conduit housing if you can." She looked at the conduit. "The electromagnetic field," she said. "You think it will mask the resonance signal?" "I don't know if it will, but it might create enough interference to make you harder to locate precisely." Another pause, then it is not a bad thought. "High praise," I said. I am honest, a brief flicker of gold in her markings. Do humans always joke in dangerous situations? The ones worth keeping around, I said. We moved forward, Save pressed against the left wall with her right hand running along the conduit housing, me a half step ahead, both of us silent. At 60 meters, I held up my hand and we stopped. At 60 meters, I could hear something. Or rather, I could feel it, a sensation just below normal hearing, a pressure change, like the atmosphere in the corridor had developed a slow pulse. At 60 meters, Save grabbed my arm. Her grip was strong, surprisingly strong. Her markings had gone a color I hadn't seen before, a deep, arterial red, just at the edges of the bioluminescent lines, underneath the persistent violet. She leaned close to me, very close. I could feel the layered frequency of her voice against the side of my face. They know something is here, she said. They are not certain of the location. The field is disrupting them, but they are aware. Can they call the others? They are calling now. They will have a location in, she paused. We have perhaps 2 minutes. 2 minutes? I did the map in my head. 200 meters, roughly, to Dock 19's access corridor. And between us and those 200 meters, 80 meters of corridor, and one of the Third Empire's sensitives, currently trying to triangulate our position. The sensitive needed to stay confused. If we ran, the movement might give them something to lock onto. If we stayed, the compact agents would eventually work their way back from the residential ring, and we'd be caught between two forces with the third above us. I thought about something Velgon had said to me 2 weeks ago. Velgon had a habit of complaining about the cargo drone systems while we ate lunch, and the specific complaint had been about interference patterns from the bulk electromagnetic shielding around the power cores, how it caused the drones to navigate erratically if they got within a certain distance. The power relay junction was behind us, about 30 meters. Save, I said very quietly. There's a power relay junction behind us. If I overload a circuit in the junction, it'll produce a significant M pulse, localized. It'll knock out sensors in a 200-meter radius for about 15 seconds. And us, everything electronic, including my translator, our comm units, the door sensors in this corridor. Including, I thought but didn't say, any kind of resonance detection that relied on coherent signal processing. 15 seconds, she said. Enough time to get past them, if we move the moment the pulse hits. You are certain this will work? I thought about Velgon's complaining, and the cargo drones, and the fact that I had never actually tried to overload a station power relay and genuinely did not know what would happen. No, I said, but it is the best option available. Yes. She looked at me for a moment. The arterial red at the edges of her markings faded. The violet steadied. Then do it. Part 5, 3 Empires. I hit the circuit overload manually, service panel, third coupling from the left, which I knew from 3 years of cargo work was the one that the engineers always said shouldn't be touched, because it was part of an older system that didn't have proper failsafes installed yet. The relay junction made a sound like a very large, very unhappy machine, taking one final breath. Then the lights went out, and every electronic device in a significant radius, including my translator and my comm unit and the door sensors, and I was betting the resonance detection system of whatever the Third Empire sensitive was using, went very briefly and very thoroughly dark. I grabbed Save's hand in the blackness. We ran. 15 seconds. I counted them the same way I'd counted the footsteps in Junction 7, 1 count, 2 count, my hand around hers, her grip solid and trusting, the corridor a sensory void around us. 7, 8. I could feel the conduit walls by touch, and I kept my free hand skimming the left side as I ran. 9, 10, 11. Somewhere ahead of us, I felt it rather than heard it, there was a presence, a shape in the dark, stationary, the sensitive. 12. I turned slightly right, away from where I'd felt them. 13. The lights came back on. We were past them, 20 meters past, still running, and I risked one glance back. The sensitive was a figure in dark clothing against the corridor wall, slight, almost human in outline but wrong in the proportions. Too tall, limbs folded at unexpected angles. Their head was turned in our direction. Their eyes from this distance reflected the corridor lights oddly, like mirrors rather than eyes. They saw us, but we were already at the Dock 19 access corridor, and the access code Velgon had left for me was still valid, and the door opened on the first try. The ship at Dock 19 was small, compact, the kind of vessel that didn't look like much until you noticed the engine configuration and the way the hull plating was layered, and then you realized it was built for one purpose above all others, getting away from somewhere very fast. Save practically collapsed against the access ramp when she saw it. I held onto her arm and we moved up the ramp, and once the outer seal was closed and the inner airlock was cycling, she let out a sound that I felt everywhere. A long, resonant, multi-frequency exhale that made the walls of the airlock vibrate faintly. "Hey," I said, "you're okay." She looked at me, all four eyes. The markings were doing something I hadn't seen before, a complex, flowing pattern of violet and gold, moving from her collarbone upward like a slow tide. "I am okay," the translator said. "Then, because of you." I opened my mouth to say something modest and probably inadequate, and then my comm unit, which had rebooted during the power relay recovery, buzzed with 3 simultaneous alerts. I looked at it. The first alert was from Kepler Station's docking authority. Compact verification vessel Keldort has issued a station-wide sweep authorization. All vessels in bays 1 through 35 are subject to boarding inspection. The second was from Dorodio Sauceda, one word, running. The third was a station-wide broadcast on the emergency frequency, in trade dialect. "This is the Driki sovereignty vessel Narath Keen. We are issuing a biological recovery priority order under Article 14 of the Interstellar Covenant. All station traffic is to cease immediately." I looked up from my comm unit. Save was reading the same alerts on a screen that had activated inside the ship's airlock, linked to the external comm array. "It is beginning," she said. "Tell me there's a pilot on this ship. The navigation system is semi-autonomous. I can operate it. A pause. I have operated it before, in less ideal circumstances. Less ideal than now. Significantly less. Another pause. You should disembark. This will become dangerous. You have done enough." I thought about my cargo sorting job, my transit renewal, my supervisor Akvaz and the docked pay, my unit in Block 14C with its fold-out work surface and its absence of external viewports. I thought about her, sitting in the maintenance alcove with her arms around her knees, watching me with 4 eyes full of the specific fear of someone who'd been hurt and expected to be hurt again. "Get us moving," I said. "I'll hold on to something." The bioluminescent markings went the brightest gold I'd ever seen from her. Not a flicker. A steady, full-intensity gold that lit the walls of the airlock like a second set of lights. She moved to the navigation console. Part 6, The Weight of 3 Empires. What happened in the next 40 minutes I am going to try to describe as accurately as I can, though I should be honest. Some of it I only understood later, pieced together from what Save explained during the 3 days of transit that followed. The Narath Keen, the Driki vessel, moved first. It was faster than the compact ship, and it was already partially maneuvered when we broke dock. Save had the semi-autonomous navigation in emergency protocols within 30 seconds of leaving the Dock 19 berth, and the ship moved with a speed and precision that suggested its designers had anticipated exactly this kind of departure. The Keldort, the compact verification vessel, was slower to respond, because the compact agents were still inside the station conducting their sweep, and the ship's crew needed time to recall them. This gave us approximately 4 minutes before both pursuit vessels were clear of the station's navigation corridor. The third ship, the one with no registry, no name in any log, was already moving when we cleared the outer bays. It had been waiting at extreme range, which is why it hadn't appeared in the docking records. It was moving toward us on a direct intercept vector. Save pulled the navigation display up, and I watched it with her, 3 points of light converging on our one. "Okay," I said, "what are our options?" "The transit relay at grid point 7 is 11 minutes at full drive," she said. "If we reach it before the intercept, we can make a jump sequence to a neutral corridor. The compact cannot follow into neutral space without triggering a jurisdictional violation. The Driki, probably the same. The third," she paused. "I do not know their limitations." 11 minutes, I said. I looked at the converging points on the display. The compact vessel, closing at standard enforcement speed, 13 minutes to intercept. The Dreeky vessel, faster, 9 minutes. The third, 8 minutes. And accelerating. "We have a problem," I said. "Yes," Save said, "we have always had a problem." She pulled up a second display. It showed a communications array, complex, layered, things I didn't fully understand. But I could see she was working something specific into it. "What are you doing?" "The Veil Compact and the Dreeky Sovereignty are rivals," she said. "They are both here in the same space, pursuing the same target. In standard circumstances, they would not act in coordination. They might act in coordination to stop the third group from getting you." "Exactly." I watched her work. It was strange. She was injured. She'd been running and afraid for hours, and at this console she was the most certain I'd seen her. Hands moving with surety, precise. Like she'd done this before, or something like it. And the part of her brain that handled fear had been temporarily overridden by the part that handled necessity. "I am sending a signal to both vessels," she said, "on their respective secure frequencies. A piece of information that both of them want, but that neither of them will be able to act on unless the third ship is dealt with first." "What information?" She looked at me. "The location of something they have both been looking for longer than they have been looking for me. Something my bloodline carries the knowledge of. A coordinate sequence. A pause. It is real. I am giving them a real piece of what they want. In exchange for them blocking the third ship. In exchange for them doing what they would do anyway, given sufficient motivation. I am providing the motivation." I watched the display. For 60 seconds, 90 seconds, nothing changed. 3 points of light still converging. Then, the Narethkeen altered course, not toward us, toward the third ship. 6 seconds later, the Keldort followed. The third ship, the nameless ship, the sensing ship, detected the course change. Its acceleration pattern shifted, responsive, tactical. And for 3 minutes, in the space between Kepler Station and Grid Point 7, 2 rival empires engaged the third in a confrontation that I watched on a sensor display I barely understood, while Save pushed our small ship toward the transit relay at everything the engines had. "They're going to be angry at you later," I said. "Both of them." Yes, the gold in her markings pulsed slow and steady, but later is later, now is now. We hit the transit relay at Grid Point 7 with 40 seconds to spare. The jump sequence was rough. Transit jumps always are on small vessels without proper compensator arrays. I held onto a structural bar, and my stomach did something it should never have to do, and for exactly 3 seconds the universe was a very interesting color that I have no name for. Then we were somewhere else. Somewhere quiet. Part 7 after. We were in a neutral corridor, one of the unclaimed transit lanes that exists between the major territorial boundaries of several galactic factions. It's the interstellar equivalent of international waters. Ungoverned, unsurveilled. The kind of space that small ships use when they're trying to go somewhere without being tracked. Save ran a full sensor sweep, twice, then sat back from the console and let out that long, resonant exhale again. "We are clear," she said. I sat down on the floor of the ship's main compartment. There were actual seats, but my legs had decided independently of my brain that the floor was appropriate, and looked at the ceiling. "Okay," I said. "Okay," the translator agreed. A silence. "The information you gave them," I said. "The coordinates, was that going to get them to stop chasing you permanently, or just delay it?" A long pause. "Delay, they will analyze the coordinates. They will find what is there, and then they will have questions that only I can answer." Another pause, "But by then I will be somewhere that is not here, and the situation will have shifted." "Shifted how?" "There are others who are aware of my bloodline and what it represents, who are not the Compact or the Dreeky or the Third. Neutral parties who have been trying to establish a different framework for how my situation is resolved." She turned to look at me. A framework based on the concept that I am a person rather than a resource. I held that for a moment. "That seems like it should be the starting point," I said, "not something that requires a framework." Yes, the markings pulsed gold. It does seem that way, doesn't it? We were quiet for a while. "The third group," I said eventually. The Empire with the sensitives, what do they want from you that the other two don't? Save was quiet for longer than usual. The Compact wants the sequence in my bloodline as a means to access a navigation technology that my ancestors developed. They want the map. The Driki want the same thing, for different strategic reasons. The third, she paused. The third wants the map destroyed. And they believe the only certain way to destroy encoded genetic information is to end the source. I didn't say anything. They are very old, she continued. And the technology my ancestors encoded in the bloodline, in what I carry, they believe it will destabilize the balance of power in this region of space. They may be right. They are certainly acting on that belief. So they want to kill you to protect the status quo. Yes. And the Compact and the Driki want you because of what you can unlock. Yes. And the neutral parties want to find a solution that doesn't end with you dead or used. Yes. I thought about it. So the question, I said, is whether the neutral parties are fast enough and organized enough to get ahead of the other three. Yes, that is the question. Another silence. Where are you going? I asked. There is a station, small, independent, in a system the three factions generally avoid. I have contact there, someone who has been working on the framework I mentioned. A pause. If I can reach them, the next phase of this becomes more navigable. More navigable, I said. High praise. I am honest, the gold again, steady, will you come? I blinked. I asked because she seemed to choose her words with care, which I'd noticed she did when something mattered. You have demonstrated an unusual quality. You make decisions based on what is necessary rather than what is safe, but you also make those decisions faster and more accurately under pressure than most beings I have encountered. And you know how to move through difficult spaces without being seen. A pause. These are useful qualities. In what comes next, useful qualities are. Useful, I finished. Yes. I looked at the ceiling of the ship's main compartment. I thought about Kepler Station and Block 14C and my cargo sorting job and the missed transit renewal and Akvaz and the worst Tuesday of my life. I have a cargo sorting certification, I said, and a basic first aid qualification that I need to renew. Yes, Save said, I know. I am not a soldier or a diplomat or a genetic researcher or anything that sounds like it would be useful in whatever this situation actually is. No, she agreed, but you found me in the rain and you did not walk away. She looked at me with all four of those pale, wide eyes. That is, in my experience, the quality that matters most. Not what a person is, what they do when they find something unexpected sitting in the rain. I sat on the floor of that small ship in the quiet of neutral space, with three empires somewhere behind us and something enormous and unknown somewhere ahead. I thought about my grandmother, who used to say my one useful quality was thinking in systems. I thought about the maintenance corridors and the power relay and the 15 seconds of dark. I thought about Save's markings going gold in the airlock, bright enough to light the walls. Okay, I said, show me what we're working with. Epilogue, what I know now. I'm writing this 3 months after that night on the lower connector. I'm on a station I'm not going to name, in a system I'm not going to specify, working alongside people I'm not going to describe in enough detail for anyone to trace. The situation with the Compact and the Driki and the third group is ongoing. That's probably the most honest word. Ongoing. There have been developments. Some of them good, some of them less good. Some of them the kind where you hold onto a structural bar and your stomach does something it shouldn't and then you're somewhere else and it worked out more or less. Save is, I don't know how to describe what Save is in this context. Not a friend, exactly, or not only a friend. A colleague, maybe, if colleagues are people you would walk through maintenance corridors in the dark for. If colleagues are people whose bioluminescent markings you've memorized well enough to know what each color means. If colleagues are people whose laugh, that subsonic double-frequency sound that you feel in your chest, is something you look forward to. The neutral parties, the ones working on the framework, they've made progress. I'm not going to say more than that because more than that isn't mine to say. The Third Empire's sensitives are still out there. We've had close calls. I've gotten better at reading sensor displays. Save has gotten better at explaining things in ways my translator can handle. People ask me sometimes, the ones who know the broad outline of the story, whether I would do it again. Walk up to a stranger in a maintenance alcove and sit down and get out the bandages. And I always say, that's not really the question. The question isn't whether I'd do it again. The question is what you do with the moment you're in. You can't go back and choose differently. You can only decide right now what kind of person you want to be when something unexpected sits down in the rain. I found her there, hurt and afraid, and watching me with 4 eyes to see if I was going to be one more thing she needed to run from. I wasn't. That's all it was in the end. That's all it ever needs to be.